in human rights, really focusing on political rights and civil liberties. And not surprisingly, Bahrain is one of those countries who has really plummeted over the last couple of years, really starting in 2011. And this was not because it was starting from a particularly high level as well, but the erosion of civil liberties and political rights in Bahrain is one of the largest in the world over that 3-year span. Now, I also want to say thank you to Hussein and his colleagues for the work that they do on shining a spotlight on the real story about what's going on in Bahrain, and the fact that they help amplify the voices of those on the ground who are daring, like Mariam and Matar and others, who are challenging authoritarian power, with really armed with nothing other than their extraordinary courage, their ideals, and the determination to engage in and organize for political change. I look around the room, I see these very stirring photos, and some of them quite chilling as well. And it's a reminder of the power of images to really help shape our understanding of events. They also humanize the tragedy, which is something sometimes those of us who work on democracy and human rights forget. It's really important to connect people who may not be following these events in a visceral way to what's going on, and these images help do that. They remind us of the courage, the sacrifice that those who are in the front lines are prepared to endure in order to try to bring about a free society. I also would note that these photos stand in sharp contrast to the propaganda that's manufactured by the Bahraini government and its very high-priced K Street hired guns, the lobbyists, who are here. They want to put out a very, very different narrative, one of a very capable and a responsive and modern state that is committed to socioeconomic progress, and as well as upholding citizens' rights. And they would have you believe that they are now under siege from violent extremists who are intent on dividing the country along sectarian lines at the behest of their Iranian masters. We need to help counter that narrative. They have a lot more money than we do, but the truth is on our side, and that's the most important thing. I don't have to tell this crowd about the fact that the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, when it really released its report, I think 2 years ago now, that not a single one of those major recommendations has been acted upon by the government of Bahrain. I don't think that's a surprise to many of us, but the excuses that have been put forward for non-action underscore that there is a profound absence of political will on the part of this monarchy to institute the changes that are to address the legitimate grievances of the long legitimate and also long ignored grievances of the majority of the country's population, that's Sunni as well as Shia. The national dialogue, which some of us had some hopes for early on, is fraught with all sorts of problems that many of you well know. And again, a basic unwillingness on the part of the ruling family to really countenance reforms that will end its monopoly on political power. And make no mistake that this basic intransigence on the part of the government is really what is increasing the likelihood that a transition away from absolute monarchy would be achieved peacefully. Sadly, it's also, let me, if I can, just for a moment, put Bahrain in the larger context of what's happening in the Gulf and beyond. Stories, whether it's from Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, more and more we're seeing authoritarian governments that are intent on shrinking the space for civil society, for pro-democracy civil society. This is actually happening way even beyond the Gulf. And it's a problem for many reasons. Now these governments, in doing that, of course they're intent on staying in power, but what's I think so insidious about this is that while they are prepared to resort to brutal force, as we've certainly seen in the case of Bahrain, in Russia, obviously in Syria for sure, but they're also learning, they're getting smarter, and they recognize that one of the tools at their disposal is the manipulation, the cynical manipulation of laws and the legal system to try to bring the patina of legitimacy to what they're doing. But make no mistake, it needs to be unmasked for what it is, which is very, very harsh repression. Now, in all this, in the context of Bahrain and others, in terms of subordinating the legislature, the legislative and judicial branches, but also the control over broadcast media, whether in Bahrain or many other countries, an attempt to vilify and demonize those who would dare to challenge, again, the authoritarian power and privilege. Now, this more aggressive and self-confident assault on civil society and fundamental freedoms is also not happening in a vacuum. Part of what makes it possible is that the democratic governments themselves, including the United States, are not doing nearly enough to counter what we're seeing in terms of this greater authoritarian solidarity, and more what I and others are calling the exporting of worst practices. There's a lot of lateral learning going on, and these repressive measures and strategies and tools that are being employed in Bahrain and elsewhere, they're learned from other states. They are restricting funding that comes into the country for civil society, all sorts of ways to basically, in one form or another, to crush dissent. The leading democratic countries have an obligation to do more. Again, there's a long, I don't have to take you through a long list of things. In the immediate term, it should be about releasing political prisoners, of course, halting the indiscriminate and excessive use of violence, force, initiating some process of accountability for those who have engaged in perpetrating violations of human rights, whether that's enforced disappearances, excessive use of force, or torture, all of which are widely practiced in Bahrain, and dropping all politically motivated charges. And we should absolutely be on the table the withdrawal of all remaining Saudi forces immediately deployed in Bahrain.